Hey there, everybody. I can see we've got some people still joining in. We're only just coming up on time, so we'll just leave it a minute or two, and then we will get underway really, really shortly with today's webinar. Okay, I see more people joining. We're just going to give it one more minute, and then we're going to get underway with today's webinar. So just hold tight, and we'll be underway in about 30 seconds or so. Okay. I think let's crack on. I can see quite a good number of people have already joined in. So let's get underway with today's webinar, which is presented by Virtuoso. I'm going to be your host and your presenter, James Bent, VP of Solutions Engineering here at Virtuoso, where today's topic is AI-powered end-to-end testing across business systems, which is something really interesting that's coming up in a lot of conversations, both with people we talk to, but also in our customers. So today's agenda is very much looking at end-to-end testing to learn about Virtuoso's approach to performing end-to-end testing across business systems and how we're using AI to enable that. So what you're going to learn about is the overview of end-to-end testing. What do we mean when we're talking end-to-end? What are the benefits and challenges of end-to-end testing? And this is based on what we've been hearing and the conversations we've been having and what we're seeing. Then we'll talk about how you can start considering developing an end-to-end QA strategy. Touch on a few of our AI capabilities, Virtuoso's natural language, our live authoring, composable authoring. But today we're actually going to be a bit more practical, where we're going to be building an end-to-end test across multiple business systems. So I'm not going to read everything on this slide, but hopefully a good number of you already know about Virtuoso. For those who don't, the crux of this slide is to say that we are an AI-powered end-to-end functional testing platform for web-based applications, inclusive of web-based business systems. We're a natural language platform, meaning you write tests in natural language, so similar to creating manual tests. And we are using AI across the platform, and I'll be sort of showing you exactly where and how that comes in. The types of testing we use for predominantly is front end, UI, UX, but more and more the majority of our clients are looking at end-to-end testing of data-driven applications, where the real business drivers here are, it comes into time, speed, need to test faster, need to be able to assure quality faster, as well as having it integrated into your environments and into your quality first testing strategies. The sort of core things in terms of business impacts that we focus on, it really comes down to fourfold. It's cost, quality, risk, and time, which are probably no surprise to anybody looking at in the QA space, or even, to be honest, in most areas of business, where again, I'm not going to read all of this out, but we provide cost efficiencies, faster ROI, particularly with automated end-to-end coverage, time savings, remaining competitive in the market by testing sooner, releasing faster, and risk mitigation and quality enhancement. So they're the four key areas of why people are really choosing to look at Virtuoso for test automation. But look, we're not really here to talk about that so much, while it's still incredibly important. What we're here to talk about is end-to-end testing. And I think it's important to just sort of, just state the obvious of what we mean by that. And I think the technical term for it is horizontal end-to-end testing. So this isn't going from sort of the back end up to the front end. This is saying working across where considering most enterprise organizations are, they're either running, or you get organizations developing a range of different applications. Could be account management, order management, supply chain, various record-based platforms that typically now are provided by separate vendors, or they could also be built house. and they're integrated together. So in that context, when we think of those enterprise applications, end-to-end testing means to test the data and records as they flow between the systems, end-to-end, ensuring the functional quality, but also the business logic works as designed. And the whole reason for doing that is because I'm sure everybody has experienced that if you make changes in one particular part of one application and it's integrated to a bunch of other applications, if you don't test end to end, then you fall foul of upstream actions impacting downstream or vice versa. I changed something in my CRM and lo and behold, it impacted my order management system. So because those systems operate as a whole, so we need to ideally test them as a whole, which is fantastic. And I don't know too many people are going to say, well, that's, I don't like the sound of that. However, I should probably do this in the reverse order. Benefits and challenges of end-to-end testing. I would say end-to-end testing for a lot of organizations is aspirational. And if I start in reverse order, the challenge of it is it's traditionally very expensive. It takes a lot of time, or took a lot of time. It takes a lot of resource to build and manage it, which starts to become prohibitive. It typically was hard to build. If you can have a framework or a tool that tests fantastically in Salesforce, when you jump across into Dynamics, suddenly you've got to do something completely different, or you may even be patching together different tools and frameworks. So it's hard to actually build tools, frameworks to make this work. And it lacks transparency. If you think of the scale of what you're doing in end-to-end testing, it's not sort of these real micro level functional tests. It's actually can be quite lengthy end-to-end business workflows represented in the test. And if you don't have a really easy to use UI, UX, it's very difficult to view that, to manage it, and to report on it. Which all kind of says, well, maybe we shouldn't bother doing it. But there are benefits, of course, of doing it, that you get comprehensive coverage. If you can test to cover across the entire application workflows, it's not necessarily that your percentage cover increases, but you're covering at a sort of a macro level, a higher level. You're able to increase the coverage going across the workflows. You're more validating the user experience because users do flow across different applications, same as business logic and business workflows. So you're actually testing in the same way that the user or the business workflow operates across those systems. And you get the early detection of defects, which is, it's not necessarily just within a module, but it is up and downstream. So if I change something in application A, I need to validate that, I haven't caused a defect somewhere else, which, is incredibly important. So then on to how do you go about developing an end-to-end testing strategy? And the funny thing is, I like to think whenever anybody comes in and looks at new automation, the first thing everyone jumps into looking at is, how do I author tests? How do I create tests? And it's almost like, how do I get pressing the buttons? Well, actually, that's the last thing you need to worry about. The first things with end-to-end testing is more about, you need to understand what the flows are. You need to design your flows. You need to design your tests. And that's really about understanding, firstly, what are the flows? You look at the requirements, you get stakeholder inputs, you look at documentation. If you don't understand the flows, you can't build tests, which is pretty obvious to state. The second thing is that, typically end-to-end testing goes across business applications. And those are, they're very modular, record-driven platforms that use data. And data that's usually contextualized to the workflow. And I would say test data is typically one of the hardest points to try and manage in end-to-end testing. Things like, I don't know what data is in the application to be able to then go and modify records as per the business workflows. So it's important to have a data strategy where you've got the data mapped to the flows, but also your strategy of how you're going to manage data within your environments, which are going to be constantly changing. You need to plan for reusability. And the reason for that is because the upside, one of the opportunities with end-to-end testing is that most of the workflows have very common sequences. Think every business application you log in is a great example. So therefore, I don't need to create the login steps every time. You know, I don't need to create going to the sales module in a CRM or you know, creating an account. Those steps can be reused because typically the variation might only be about 5 steps at the end, but you've got to get to that point. So if you're not really thinking about reusability, then you're creating effort from the outset. You know, if you're always creating everything from scratch, then it's not really efficient. But then also one of the critical things is you do need to set governance and controls. You are going to be involving a range of stakeholders. You are going to be getting into a level of complexity in the tests, both the individual tests and the test management. So if you haven't thought about who can perform what actions, particularly when aligned to if you're creating sort of reusable sequences, if you don't control who can modify things, you can get into a mess pretty quickly. So setting up that's going to be really important. So you have the validation of who can do what, when, but also check the quality of what you're building. So on to Virtuoso then, around, you know, some of the features which I'm going to be giving you sort of a live view of. And again, you know, those of you already familiar with us will know these. Firstly, we use natural language where you can just write, let's say, click on select, and instead of having to build an object or a keyword or look for selectors, we have AI-driven bots that go and locate that element in the DOM structure for you. So that's really critical first because, you know, not so much for that feature, but if we think about if end-to-end testing, I want to involve different stakeholders, maybe business users, maybe non-technical folks, then having something that's easy to build and read for themselves is going to be really important. Self-healing for dynamic changes. You know, anybody who's ever worked with web applications knows that they're incredibly dynamic. You know, form fields, buttons, icons, the element structure, the XPath and IDs and classes are constantly changing. Sometimes every time you load the page. Salesforce, which I'll show you today, is a brilliant example. So, you know, another sort of big reason for end-to-end testing being very complex is that, and hard to manage, is huge amount of maintenance burden. You know, you might be able to build the test, but then you're going to have to sit there spending a lot of time healing those manually, whereas we're using AI to do that automatically. Then we'll come on, and this is I think this is a really interesting concept, is what we call composable automation. So the ability to build tests from composable sequences, like, you know, your login steps is a simple example. Making sure you decouple all your tests from environment and test data, make them very reusable. Be able to share those with other people to build their tests with. Be able to map in your environment, your test data, modify with specific steps, test steps if needed, and then start running those tests. It starts to become incredibly fast. And in fact, it can become a strategy to say, I only have some people that write tests, other people plug them together and maybe do some minimal modifications. We're going to be taking a look at this concept, but it really is going to form the basis of you know, an efficient end-to-end testing strategy with Virtuoso. And then this is sort of a, you know, you could almost call it a tool, but it's actually very powerful. An AI assistant for summarizing what the actual test contains. And so what we've done is use generative AI to be able to say, once you've created the test, which might be 100 or 150 steps, and, you know, asking somebody to understand what that test does means they've got to really try and read and decipher it. We've got this nice AI assistant for providing immediately a summary of the test within a few lines, so people can start saying, I get what this does, especially as it might go across multiple applications and multiple modules. So we'll be showing that to you as well. And then finally, something we have in beta, which is something we're still sort of building out further, is using generative AI for authoring tests. So more natural language requirements to start building test steps without sort of any real understanding of our syntax, which, you know, even though it's easy, is, you know, still requires a little bit of learning. And this, I think, links into an approach you can start thinking about with the composable sequences. If I can use AI to build from requirements and generate reusable sequences, starts to become very powerful. Now, don't worry if that sort of sounds a little bit abstract, because what we're going to do now is jump in and take a look at the platform itself. And what I'm going to do is actually come in and I'm going to build a test and sort of start showing some of those aspects of how you can start thinking about constructing, composing automation. Which one of the first things is thinking about designing your workflows. So I would say actually the first thing you really want to be doing is coming in and thinking about just purely the structure of what tests am I going to create. So for that, the first thing you're going to do, I mean, in Virtuoso, we have a structure of you have an organization into which you can create a testing project, into which you can create what we call goals. It's like a test pack. And within that, you then create your journeys. And journeys are the tests. And now, firstly, I would say the first thing I would be doing is going through, and this probably already exists in your test case design, is to start working out what is my journey going to be? Is it going to be to create an account in Salesforce, create an insurance customer in OutSystems, and an account in D365? That's sort of starting to design out what you're going to build. And it may be a departure to how you're testing today, especially if you're only looking at individual features or individual applications. And it actually starts to align back more to say your flows are literally that. They're mapping back to the way that the business interacts with those applications, more of an end-to-end workflow. So designing these out and deciding what's going to go in them first is really, really important. Secondly, is to think about your test data. So if we jump across, test data for us, so you can data drive tests. And if I just give an example of that, within tests, you can map in data variables. So basically you can decouple the test from data, whether that's environment variables or whether it's data that will go into the test. And we have a number of ways that you can bring this in. The first is you can bring in test data. So I could bring in a CSV file of test data sets to create parameterized data sets. I would probably use this more if I've got more fixed values, like system values that map to scenarios that I'm going to be able to, I'm going to use that, it might be an insurance product, for example, that has set values and set parties that I'm going to utilize because that's what the business has specified. But that doesn't mean you're fixed to that, because if you think about with end-to-end testing, one of the troubles might be I need to go and create a customer and do something with that customer. But the trouble is that if I use that customer once, it means I can't use them a second time, and I end up with lots and lots of sort of duplicate data. So what you can do in Virtuoso is you can, again, if you remember me saying we're a natural language platform, you can actually create your own natural language to create, whether it's data or perform functions. So as a good example, if I said, well, in my test, I'm going to use some system values from my test data table. But then what I'm going to do is I want to create, let's say it could be a random company name that I'm going to put in and create an account in the CRM with. We've actually got a nice little AI bot that I can say, generate a random realistic company name. And then what that will do is that will create my JavaScript for me. So it's JavaScript driven. I don't know JavaScript, but I can use an AI bot to generate JavaScript to, in this case, create a random but realistic company name. So what you're doing is basically as part of your strategy, your test strategy is saying, actually, I can create data on the fly effectively. And we'll show how that operates in just a moment. Now, I'm not going to touch too much on this webinar, but what you can also bring in is the ability to utilize API calls as well. So for example, I can come in and set up API calls. So for example, this could be to get or create data via API endpoints. This is obviously, quite a technical thing, but it can form part of your strategy. For example, as you're testing, if you don't know what data is in the environment, but you need to, let's say, get an opportunity to modify it, I could use a series of API calls to first go and get or create data. And that would be maybe one of the first tests that you run, which is actually data setup. So I'm not going to drill in too much on that in this webinar, but it's just to say there are different ways to be able to go through and start thinking about your data strategy. Because if you haven't got that, then it's going to be very difficult to start thinking about creating your your automation. But then when we actually get into starting to do our testing, let's create a new journey here. Now, this one is, I'm actually going to go through in this test. I'm going to go to OutSystems. I'm going to go into Salesforce and go into Dynamics. And what I've already done here, I've already been building tests for a while. So what I've got in Virtuoso, our journeys are split into what we call checkpoints. And if I give you an example of that, checkpoints they're like sequences, like scenarios, like logging in, like opening an insurance app. And the nice thing here is that when I build these, if I know it's going to be reusable, I can choose to add that into a library. And so the idea here is actually, as much as possible, when you design your flows, it's not just the top level view, it's actually starting to think about your sequences, your checkpoints, building those out to say from the outset, I should be trying to build maximum reusability. And how that actually works, if I jump in here, is to say I'm at the login screen and I know I've already got the login steps for OutSystems. So I can look in the library and I see that I've got the login steps and I can drop those in. So now what I've got is I've already, without having to write anything, I've already got my login sequence where I've logged into OutSystems. Now I'm at the home page and I want to open the insurance app. So I know I've already got those steps as well. So I've got another common sequence, which is to open the home page. So without building anything, without rewriting anything, I've already got OutSystems open, ready to go. But actually, I don't want to go into OutSystems just yet. I want it open. But what I want is to also go into Salesforce. And the nice thing here, again, I've got my Salesforce steps already created. So navigate to Salesforce. And then when I'm in Salesforce, I'm going to do the login sequence. So we can see I'm going to come in. And you can see without really doing anything, I've logged into OutSystems, gone to the home page. Now I've opened Salesforce, and now I've logged into Salesforce. Where the really nice thing here is in Virtuoso, you can have multiple tabs open. So I've got both OutSystems and Salesforce open. So straight away, I can facilitate jumping between tabs to do my sort of my end-to-end testing, moving across those. And then a final thing I want to do here is I want to work in the sales module. So another reusable sequence I'm going to add in is to open the sales module. So this starts getting you thinking, actually, you can see how fast it is to start creating those. And again, they're completely reusable. Maybe I will map in different environment variables, but other than that, they're reusable sequences that anybody can bolt together. But now what I want to do, I've come to the account screen. So now I'm going to show you how, let's say you don't have a sequence already built. So what we're going to do now, we're going to create a new account. And again, in Virtuoso, we're a natural language platform where literally if I see there's a button on the screen that says new, I can just say click on and then new, because that's what the label says. And without having pre-built, a keyword or an object or looked for selectors, it's gone and opened, clicked on the new button, and then I can see the page loaded. So I'm just going to say I put a dynamic wait to wait for the new account, because that's on the screen, it's unique. And that is a dynamic wait. So that's either wait 20 seconds or for that to load. Now, what I want to do now is that company name. So where I created my extension, my company name, what I want to do now is use that, because I'm not really bothered about what the company name is. I want to put in sort of generate details on the fly. So I'm going to just write company name, and then I'm going to return a variable, which is company name. And what that does is in the test that immediately goes and run that for me. I think I just had to put something in there that I missed out. In fact, I've got another one over here because I just mucked that one up, which is to generate an account name. So I'll go and replace that. So what I'm going to do is use that one to say, I'm going to do a random account name. There we go. And return the, let's call it account. And that will go and generate that on the fly for me. I'm just going to run that from there. So now what I can do is I can then say, I want to write it into the account name. And for Salesforce, I'm going to say, I'm going to look for the account name field. Then I'm going to click on the account name field, because I know in Salesforce, you have to activate the form field. And then I'm going to write my account name and into the input field. So what I've done now is just generated some random data. In fact, it was account, so let's just change that. There we go, that's my variable, and I'll run it from here. And you'll start to see this is a neat capability where I can kind of iterate and just run and refine. So it's very easy for me to modify this. And what you're seeing here is actually, as I'm writing the test steps, it's running immediately. We call this live authoring. So I can run, refine, see that it works, see that it operates. And now all I'm going to do is click on save. So what I've done now in one system, I've created an account using an account name that I've generated on the fly. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come through and I want to create a contact, because that's what I'm going to use in my other systems. So I've already got a flow to be able to open the contacts, again, because that's a common sequence. So I'm going to wait for the contacts, show more actions, then open up and create a contact so that I can go and fill in the contact information. And to do this in the background, I've already created a couple of extensions, which are to generate a random full name and a random last name. So I'm going to use that in my test. So now that I'm into my creating the account, let's go and say, contact details. And I'm going to come in and say, look for the contact information. Just because, again, I already had that one in the last step. So what I'm going to do first is look for the first name field. Click on the input, which is first name. And again, that's just because in Salesforce, I have to activate that field. And then what I want to do is say, I want to generate the random first name. And we're going to do returning a first name variable, and then write that first name into the input field. So again, what I've done here, I'm creating an account. I'm creating sort of random data, which I'm then writing immediately onto the screen. So this way I could kind of assure that every time I run my test, I'm not sort of reusing the same, in this case, customer details. In just the same way, I could create a random last name, and let's return that into last name. And then I can come in and say, look for the last name field, and then click on the input for last name. And hopefully what you're sort of seeing here is the speed at which we're building this. We're able to just go in and create this at speed and start building our end-to-end workflow. So in this case, I've created my contact, and then I can click on save. So within this, I'm starting to build out my end-to-end flow. So I've gone into Salesforce and done as much as I want to do. I've created an account and a contact. Now what I actually want to do is I want to switch back to OutSystems. And the reason for that is I'm going to use those contact details to then go and fill in and create a customer in OutSystems. So you can see I can control the tabs. I can move back to OutSystems. I can then come in and say that I want to create a new customer. So let's click on that. And what's actually happening here, again, just to remind, is every time I'm writing these, we're using AI bots to look in the DOM structure and locate those elements effectively. Whether it's clicking on something, whether I'm going to pick, and in this case, I'm going to take from my test data, I'm going to take the insurance type field. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to write that into my insurance type dropdown. So whether we're talking about clicking actions or writing into inputs or picking from dropdown, you can have natural language to be able to control what it does. Now, the only thing I've done here is this insurance type. The one thing I forgot to do in this test was map my test data into the test. So I'm just going to go and say, I want to pull in my test data table. And now when I rerun this, that's now going to pull the data in and put it into and basically pick from the field there. So as you can see, what we're starting to do, we're starting to jump around, and I'm actually just going to run this again so I can pick up that table. We're starting to jump around and start using, create test data. We're able to start building out segments using reusable components. Even, for example, this contact details, I may say, well, great, I've created that now. And actually, I'm going to reuse that again and again. So what I'll do is I'll drop that into the library. And you'll see immediately that goes purple. And now that will be in the library. So now anybody can use that. So I think it's really important to consider as you start building out your test that this is the planning for reusability. And I'll talk about how we facilitate this, even if you're testing in different environments. And typically this would be a burden to do if you were having to build these out and you were building elements that were fixed on XPath and IDs and classes and those change, you'd struggle to do this. But I'll talk about how Virtuoso's AI self-healing really helps facilitate this to enable this to happen. And what I'll do, just while that's running through, I'll sort of show to you in the background how that's really firstly working is that every test step you write, we look in the DOM structure and build out a model of each of those elements. But the really key thing is that unlike other sort of frameworks and tools, we're not fixed to that model. So we're not going to look for that XPath every time. We're not going to look for the ID. And if it changes, then the test breaks. I'll talk in just a second about how the self-healing really enables you to kind of free yourself up from that. So you can start building all of this sort of reusability. What I'm going to do sort of in the interest of time is, even though I haven't sort of finished the customer here, what I'm going to do is just come in and show how where I use the first name and the last name here, I could then say, I've got a full name field. So what I'm going to do is say, write the first name plus a space plus the last name. So I'm going to use the data that I put into Salesforce and I'm going to write that into the full name field in another system. So basically what I can do is start carrying data through the applications so that even if I'm jumping around different modules, I can capture that. But in addition, what I could do is sort of come through and store data from the UI as well. So I could say I want to pick from that input field, I want to store that value into a variable. So I could say insurance customer. And what this allows me to do, actually, imagine you've got a record ID, where you create an account in Salesforce and you need the record ID to then jump across into your order management system. Being able to store data means that, again, you can carry data through systems, even if it's dynamically generated within the application. What I want to do finally is just jump across, because I want to talk about, even though we are sort of highlighting some AI capabilities here, where we're starting to take things. And what I want to do is jump across and I'm going to open Dynamics and then log into Dynamics. So again, we're actually now opening a third application. So in one test, one journey, we've got OutSystems, we've got Salesforce, and we've got Dynamics, which really also highlights that Virtuoso, we're not specific to any of these technologies. We're agnostic. As long as it's a browser-based application, even if it's an inbuilt in-house system in React or .NET or Angular, as long as it's browser-based and it has a DOM structure, then Virtuoso will work with it. So it's very powerful to say, actually, now you're freed up because you're not having to put in multiple tools to try and deal with, one for Dynamics, one for Salesforce, and one for APIs, and it's very difficult to bring them together. Here, you're able to test across all those applications. But what I'm going to show to you just after this finishes logging in is what we're doing more with AI authoring. And I'll talk to you around, even though this is a bit of a beta feature, what we're sort of planning on doing in terms of, how it's going to start really mapping into potentially test requirements, workflow requirements. And what the AI authoring does, and I think this is going to be very useful, particularly for building your reusable segments. So if I come in and say, I could select a region on the screen and say, click accounts. And what that will do, or let's say I'll put more freeform, so I can say open accounts, for example. It will go through and generate our syntax test step for me. And then I could just see, because the page is loading, I might just put a quick wait for, and then on the next page, we'll see my active accounts. Now, remember, these are dynamic waits, so they're not going to slow your test down. But then what I might do is come in and say, we could go and let's say, create a new account, for example. And I might come out and select the region on the screen. I don't have to. Where again, we're putting in more free form text. These are quite simple, but you could be going and putting more of a workflow in there. And then it will come in and start generating test steps for you so that you don't even have to think. I kind of like to think of this a bit of maybe like a co-pilot, for example. And then if I want to fill in the account information, I could say literally that, fill in the account information. Now, again, this is a beta feature and we're getting feedback from this where I think the key area people are interested in is how this maps into that original design, test case design requirements, and then using that as an assistant to be able to go through and start generating test steps, as we've done here, so that it's not going to do everything. It's not going to be autonomous at this stage, because, for example, here, the data's rubbish. So I know I'm going to have to go back through and say, well, actually, let's change the data to Virtuoso QA, for example. So I'm probably going to have to go back and refactor these, maybe change the website to virtuoso.qa. And then I'm probably going to come back in and just rerun those steps, just so I can see that it then puts the values I want. So I got the field and the value the wrong way around there. But it just starts to show how that's something that's available as a beta now. But it's very much we're gaining feedback from that, because in the end-to-end testing, what I think we really want to do is build it from a requirement and then try and do that to create my reusable sequences. So now I can drop those in so that anybody can use those. The final two things I want to talk about is so governance. So these reusable sequences, you can modify them and have the changes propagate across all the tests that reuse them. So for example, if you insert in the login sequence, there's a new field. I'll just put it as a comment. So this is a new field, for example. Then you can push that across all of the tests that share that, which is useful, but it's also potentially quite dangerous, because if you've got 10 tests that cover that, and somebody comes in thinking I'm just modifying my test, excuse me, all of a sudden you might be breaking a whole bunch for an awful lot of people. So what we have is the ability, firstly, in the organization and project structure, you can choose to share this with, but also you can create roles and responsibilities. So as an example here, I could come in and say, I want a standard tester to be able to run tests. I don't want them to be able to create extensions. I don't want them to muck around with data tables, plans, environments. In fact, all I want them to do is to be able to execute journeys and write tests. Equally, if I want a sort of an admin where you say, I want you to be able to create and edit those library checkpoints, those reusable sequences, you can really start specifying who can do that. So in this way, you start getting controls, in addition to our standard system roles, which means you have control as to not just who has access, but the types of actions they can perform. And then finally, and this is, in the famous sort of saying, the last but not least, one of the really sort of major capabilities we have, if you remember, when you first build the test in natural language, we captured that element structure. We're not fixed to it. Every time you run the test, every version of that test, we're saying we understand that it's very likely the element structure is going to change. That's very prevalent in browser-based business systems. For example, here in Dynamics, we can see that the element my work is the same, but we can see the class, the IDs, the XPath, they've all changed. So all of these little sticking plasters or band-aids, depending which part of the world you're in, those are AI self-healing points, where we're re-identifying the element based on the initial inputs we've had and all the inputs from the continuous self-healing, so that if we see there are the changes, the test automatically self-heals as the test runs. And we've been around now since 2017, and I'm sure if that's something people are seeing for the very first time, that might freak some people out. And what if it's going to create a monster and start clicking everywhere? The answer is, after about 7 years of seeing this operating, that doesn't happen. It's actually very reliable in terms of how it heals and updates tests. It's not going to add in new features for you. So it's not going to, if you put in a new button, it's not going to pick that up. It's more about keeping tests running from existing capabilities so you can focus on the important thing, which is building tests in natural language, aligning to business workflows, making it reusable. Then when you run them, which, very briefly, we're your grid, we're on AWS, you can build plans to run and orchestrate your tests. You've got natural language readable tests with screenshots and testing evidence captured, self-healing, so you're not bogged down with test maintenance. So now you can genuinely scale, even though your end-to-end testing is becoming, more complex in the level of testing you're doing. And you're able to really achieve that increased coverage across more of the entire application suite at speed. So you can probably tell by the cadence of my voice, the way I'm gradually sort of coming to a sort of a point, is that I'm doing literally just that. That's sort of about as much today as I'm going to talk on. Hopefully that has been useful. That's not the button I meant to click. So time for some Q&A, which please feel free to put into the chat if you have some QA. So we've got a question here, and if you just go into Zoom in the Q&A, you can put a question in there. So we've got a question around, we are testing the front-end application and Windows Java application at the same time. Is it easy to implement this? So we create something in the web app and we can set it in the Windows app. So the answer is we are only testing browser-based applications. So we don't test native applications, installed applications, unless they are rendered in a browser. However, if you remember, we can test from the API layer. So what some people do, depending on what actions you have to perform in other applications, if you can do the UI in the browser and facilitate anything at the data layer, then that can be facilitated. But otherwise, we do focus on browser-based applications. Question: is this being recorded? The answer is yes, it is. It will be up on our website within the next day or so. So yeah, but feel free to reach out to us as well, and we can share the link to that. But it will be live. Is there an option to view responsive or mobile layouts on live authoring? So the answer is you can change the viewport. So you can, while we're always on our when you're doing the live authoring, it's always running on a headless Chrome browser. You can change the screen resolution, so you can set it to emulate effectively running on the same size as, if you want to do different size screens, even down to sort of iPad and iPhone sizes. When you run the test, there is an option to run it again on our headless Chrome on our AWS, but then you can run it through Browser Stack and Lambda test and pick devices to be able to run those. And again, that is through the mobile browser, which would be the Safari or Chrome on iOS or Android. So yes, you can do that. Otherwise, another question, which is just around how can you find out more information? So actually, if you go onto our website, virtuoso.qa, then we've got some resources which link out. We've got really great documentation, really thorough. We've got YouTube videos, including some videos covering end-to-end testing and all the sort of all the features and capabilities we have. And of course, we're always willing to have a chat with you to just see if this is something that can work, which again, is not just from a capability level. We are a commercial platform. So that's where I did highlight in terms of the business impacts and benefits, then obviously it's got to have that. Another question about the video recording. So yeah, that will it will be on the, if you go onto the website in the resources and webinars, we post all our webinar recordings on there, and it will be up typically within the next 24 hours. But again, you can ping us and we can send it to you to save you having to look if you want. My email's up on the screen there, hopefully. Okay, otherwise, hopefully that has been of use to everybody. Food for thought. Obviously it's quite a quick view of things, but if that has piqued your interest at all, don't hesitate. Either you can reach out to me, james.b@virtuoso.qa, or on our website, of course, we've got a contact form where you can get in touch. And the first thing we always want to do is have a discussion around how this can work, if it works, benefits it provides, and that sort of thing. There's no point going further than that unless there's some accord in this. Otherwise, I think all that's left for me to say to everyone is thank you very much for attending. I hope that has been useful for you. It's been a pleasure to share this. Have a good rest of the morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. Otherwise, hope to talk to you again at some point in time. Thank you very much, everyone.